As we know, the US spends by far the most amount of money on its military, which isn't necessarily surprising. They came out of World War II as a superpower with bases across the world, then they emerged from the Cold War as a sole superpower with influence over countries across the world. And its high cost of living combined with its large population really adds up when it comes to paying personnel and labor costs and defense contractors, etc. But still, the US spends more than the next 11 largest combined. And that's a fact that's often repeated. But what few ever seem to ask is why. But first, our sponsor, Ground News. You might have seen this before, and I honestly really think it's a cool app. They take and compare news stories, putting them side by side so you can see how differently they're being covered. And if you're like me, and you want to know the truth, you know that the only way to do so is to hear all sides, and hear them directly from each side, not just one's interpretation of the other. It'd be really nice if something like this existed for the work I do here, instead of having to manually check what Russia or China and the US is claiming. Just having them right there to compare would save me so much time. Ground News is a first-of-its-kind website and app that enables you to quickly see the whole picture. But that's not all they do. They also have other tools, like the bias distribution chart or the blind spot feed, which shows you stories that are being either underreported or even not reported at all by the other side. Go check it out. It's free. There's no need to even sign up to get started. Go to ground.news/covercabal or just click the link in the description to try it out. Again, Ground News. The 2022 defense budget request total is $752.9 billion. Of that, $715 billion goes to the Department of Defense, the remaining $37.9 billion to the Department of Energy and other agencies. I think it's also important to note that this is the budget request. Amounts can, and they often do change when they're going through Congress before being sent back to the president to sign, and then the actual final dollar amounts can even vary somewhat from the enacted. But for our purposes, these figures are close enough to get a basic idea. The easiest way to get a good idea of where the money goes is breaking it down into categories. The military personnel budget, which includes base pay for personnel, retirement, housing, etc., which ends up accounting for 23% of the total budget. Operations and maintenance, which takes up the most, at 36%. This includes fuel, supplies, spare parts, routine maintenance and major overhauls of aircraft, ships, ground vehicles, electronic support equipment, and facilities, as well as recruiting, training, education, administrative activities, headquarters and supply operations, and much more. Then there's military construction at 1%, 5% to the health program, 19% on procurement, that's missiles, bombs, tanks, ships, aircraft, etc. And finally, research and development, the remaining 16%. That's the breakdown. Often, when people just mention flat-out numbers, or make statements like the US spends more than the next 11 combined, they are implying that the US is spending too much and it needs to be reduced. And maybe they are right. But any fruitful discussion requires more than that, like stating specifically where they would cut. Is that personnel wages, or maintenance and operations, or maybe research and development? And the same is true when people advocate for paying active military more. Maybe they are right. But with it already costing nearly a quarter of their entire budget, even small increases easily cost billions of dollars. So my point is, vague, uninformed blanket statements never lead to any efficient or effective change. It's important to know the details. It's also fun to look through the budget and read the way it's being presented. Every year, it's presented as the most ingenious, effective budget that solves all defense problems for the US. The latest defense budget not only takes on Russia and China, but also climate change and the virus. But on a serious note, one interesting thing I found was in procurement. A full 16%, or $21.6 billion, goes into buying completely classified equipment, which is much higher than I would have guessed. Then there's another $23.6 billion under operations and maintenance that's classified. Also, the previous year's budget included over $50 billion for Afghanistan. With the US having pulled out, you'd expect that to be freed up. However, there's still billions of dollars stated toward funding things like the Afghan National Army. But as we know, that doesn't exist anymore. It collapsed almost immediately after the US pulled out. So that could change. But anyway, that's it. Just some interesting observations. I always find it fascinating how so many people in the US have such strong opinions on defense spending without actually knowing anything about it. So go check it out for yourself. It's always fun to see what the US is buying and their justifications they make for it. I'll put the links down in the description.